I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Silly Jedi! Silly Jedi!
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
Hello, Star Wars fans, and welcome to Jedi Toy Masters Star Wars Car Talk, the podcast that discusses Star Wars while driving in the car, in the comfort of your car. I'm Maurice Mercado. I don't think I've ever introduced myself on this podcast. I think I just kind of started the podcast, although the first episode of the podcast was titled My Star Wars Story, and I kind of gave a history of how I got started as a Star Wars fan. And so if you want to check that out, you can check the link below in the show notes, or also you can check out our playlist, or just go back to the first episode and check it out. So if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or on Anchor or wherever you listen to podcasts, thank you for listening, and we hope that you subscribe. I hope you subscribe, and especially if you're on the Apple Podcast, I hope you give us a good review and give us 5 stars, because apparently that helps. There's some kind of Apple Podcast algorithm god that makes your podcast valuable to the world if you give it a good review. That's what I hear. But anyway, so I'm Maurice Mercado. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at the Maurice Mercado, or the Maurice Mercado. I'll link it below as well. But our Instagram account is originally Jedi Toy Masters. So if you want to check that out, that's where we kind of that's all things Star Wars and toys and fun stuff. And if you just want to follow Star Wars Car Talk, we also have an Instagram account for that as well. And we've been posting basically old episodes on there, the previous episodes right on there. So if you're on your phone and you, for whatever reason, aren't able to listen to it in podcast form, you can listen to it and watch it right on Instagram, on IGTV. So all of that to say, welcome. Hope you guys had a great week. And some news kind of was floating around the Star Wars interwebs late last week, and I didn't really get a chance to comment on it last week, but I wanted to touch base on it today. And that is this whole thing with the Rise of Skywalker novelization. It's coming out, or by the time you listen to it, it might have already come out. But a lot of folks have been getting advanced copies of it, and a lot of content from it has been coming out on the internet, and people have been commenting on it and sharing, bits and pieces from the novelization and certain things that were kind of expanded on in the novelization. And that always happens, when especially with Star Wars movies lately. It seems like the book comes out and it's chock full of this extra information that would have been nice to have known when we watched the movie. Now, this has been going back all the way to the original Star Wars. I mean, after A New Hope, George Lucas commissioned an author to kind of write a story in the event that there was going to be no sequels, and that's in the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which is, from what I understand, a fascinating fascinating story of Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, and they're trapped on some planet, and they face Darth Vader, and it's a very interesting story. This is before we ever knew about Luke and Leia being siblings, and I don't even think that was the intention, or that was the idea even when that book was written. So if that story would have been canon, it would have changed a lot of things and added to the lore. But all the novelizations of different Star Wars films have always added more to it. I mean, I listened to the audiobook right before Rogue One came out. I listened to the prequel book for Rogue One, which I think is called Catalyst. And even though it was a prequel book, it basically expanded even more on the events that would take place in Rogue One, and Director Krennic and Galen Erso and all that stuff. So the good thing about books is that you have the freedom to like do that, to expand. I mean, when we didn't have Disney Star Wars, you know, we had the expanded universe. We have novels and comics that were part of the expanded universe. I mean, that's literally what it was called. So books, these stories are to expand the universe. Now, the thing with The Rise of Skywalker that I think is rubbing a lot of people the wrong way, it's touching on the origin or the reason for Palpatine being back. And that's, I think, what's causing a lot of problems. If you watch, you know, YouTube Star Wars experts, you know, Star Wars Theory, I'll link him below. He's a great channel, great guy, a huge Star Wars fan, and he likes to dive into a lot of this stuff. And he actually has made a lot of videos where he basically is reading excerpts from the book and expanding on it. And, you know, a lot of others that have been coming out, you know, writing articles and, you know, the whole thing with Palpatine being a clone. I think it shouldn't be surprising. It's revealed in the novel when Kylo Ren goes to confront, I mean, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker, I mean, if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you're a Star Wars fan, and if you're a Star Wars fan, you should have seen it already. You should have watched it. It shouldn't be a surprise that he's a clone. So Kylo Ren goes to confront him, as we see in the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker. You know, discovers where he is, discovers Exegol. He sees Snoke clones in like these giant jars, and then he's confronted with this Emperor Palpatine creature, and yeah, it looked weird. And when I watched it, I just remember thinking, like, why? It's almost as if they decided to like not put any makeup on Ian McDiarmid, because Ian McDiarmid's an older man now, so it just seemed like they just kind of went with like what an older person would look like, not the way the Emperor looked. And I kind of thought that was weird. But then now in this novelization, it's kind of revealed that this is a clone, an imperfect clone that had been grown basically and has been just waiting for the right time, the right power, the right opportunity to be able to come out and become full-blown Emperor Palpatine. And so apparently what's explained and what's alluded to in the novel is that when Darth Vader threw Palpatine down that shaft in the Death Star, as he was falling to his death, and if you remember in Return of the Jedi, as soon as he, like, you hear him falling all the way down, all of a sudden then like it's like this wave of energy like kind of like permeates out, and it kind of makes sense. They kind of retconned it. But so as he's falling to his death, he was able to allow his body to be destroyed, but his essence, he learned like the Sith ability to make his essence kind of like leave that place. And similarly to the way Kylo Ren and Rey kind of can teleport objects as we see, or teleport each other through the Force, he was able to kind of teleport his essence from that point of him falling down that shaft dying to a vessel that he had waiting for him on Exegol. And so the idea was that he had been already working on a plan, a contingency plan, to clone himself in the event that he was killed, or if Vader decided to turn on him. Because I guess, you know, he kind of foresaw all this stuff happening, but he didn't know how it was going to happen or whatever. So these clones that had been working on through Sith science and Sith, you know, it was like an imperfect clone. And so that body, that's why it was all fragile and hooked up to that machine. And it isn't until later at the end of Rise of Skywalker that, you know, he realizes that Rey and Ben being together, he can suck the living force out of them and heal himself and become full-powered Palpatine, which we see at the end of the movie. You know, now the other thing that's driving everybody crazy, now that in itself isn't bad when you think about it, because it doesn't really diminish what Vader did. Vader still like symbolically destroyed the Empire, because, you know, it took Palpatine then 30 years to be able to amass this secret Starfleet and be able to like wait it out and be able to get to a point where he can then come back and do something about it. So, you know, Anakin did bring balance to the Force and kind of, you know, tip the scales to the good. I think what undermines the original trilogy isn't so much that they brought Palpatine back. I think what undermines the original trilogy is that you have the First Order, that the First Order even exists, that an organized military, you know, this organized military like entity was able to be created in the absence of the Empire, but in the presence of the New Republic. You know, like, that's the thing that I've had an issue with the sequel trilogy. You know, you can't, like, how can you do that? Anyway, the thing that's crazy, as if that's not crazy enough, it makes sense, but it's crazy, but it makes sense. They goes on to explain somehow in the novelization that Palpatine's son, who was the father of Rey, was in fact also a clone of Palpatine. So not only was Palpatine a clone, but he cloned himself, and in an attempt to clone himself, he created this imperfect clone that had no Force powers, that was essentially like his son, that he kind of like passed off as his son, who then he allowed to, you know, find love, you know, get married apparently, and, you know, go run off and have a child. And that was Rey. And he was counting on the fact that maybe if they have a child naturally, that this child will have the Force. And that right there is the tougher pill to swallow. You know, it's bad enough that in the prequels, George Lucas kind of explained Anakin's existence by saying it was a virgin in the Force. Like, that was a little bit wild. Like, you know, that was kind of crazy in a biblical way, but it was also kind of understandable. You know, there's a lot of parallels between world religions, Christianity, and the Force, Star Wars, all that stuff. So it's understandable that he kind of went that route. It was a sexy thing to write, to make it that, yes, he was created by the Force. You know, the Force willed his existence. Okay, he is the chosen one. But now the fact that you have Palpatine creating a clone in the background, and that all this stuff was happening in the background, maybe like during Empire Strikes Back, maybe during Return of the Jedi times, like all this stuff was happening in the background. He was, you know, it's just such a tough pill to swallow. Now the math, I don't even know if the math adds up, because now he dies during the events of Return of the Jedi. Between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, it's about 30 years. So, okay, maybe this Rey's son at this point, maybe he was created a few years. Maybe he was created during Empire Strikes Back. Maybe when he was talking to Vader as a hologram in Empire Strikes Back, he was on Exegol at that time, creating this clone of his son that he would soon become his son. And, you know, by the time this guy ran off and tried to have a life of his own, and when he found out that, I don't know, it's just the math, the logic, it just doesn't really add up, and I just don't understand. This is the frustrating part. I understand it's a movie, it's fantasy, it's made up, I get it, but it's also Star Wars, and not only that, it's you're a company, Lucasfilm, Disney, you're boasting about the fact that you have a story group, that you respect the legacy that of what George Lucas created. You say all these things, but then you, with the films especially, because I don't see this same type of looniness happening on the animated side. Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and even Star Wars Resistance are really solid shows, like really solid stories. That's stuff. The Star Wars creative story group or whatever, like they're doing it. They're doing their job there. But when it comes to the films, it just seems like nobody knows what they're doing. It's like, it's all of a sudden, it's almost like as if you got a room full of people that have never watched Star Wars. You got a room full of people that never, don't know anything about Star Wars. All of a sudden, coming up with these loony ideas that, you know what, if this was any other fantasy film series, yeah, go right ahead, you know. And I get it, Star Wars isn't based on a novel. It's not like, you know, but it's Star Wars. It's, you know, like, I don't understand. I hear the criticism. There's the criticism that, oh, the problem is that, you know, Star Wars fans have gotten to a point where they think that they can do a better job at coming up with Star Wars stories because they know more about Star Wars than the people that are making Star Wars. I hear that criticism, and when you first hear it, you're like, yeah, you know what, it's true. I mean, these guys are experts. This is Hollywood. These are people that, you know, they're storytellers, they're producers, they're filmmakers. Like they must know better than us. But no, they don't. They don't, because when you love something as much as a Star Wars fan loves Star Wars, you know the ins and the outs. This is something that, like, you grew up on, that you love, that you cherish. So yeah, I think the fans, to a large degree, know a little bit more about Star Wars than the people that are creating Star Wars. It's and you know what? Not to knock guys, you know, these creators like Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, and, you know, because obviously these are filmmakers, these are artists that to some degree Star Wars impacted them at an early age and kind of inspired them. George Lucas inspired them to become filmmakers and creators. So, you know, yes, but at the same time, I feel like they created something based on them trying to make Star Wars like for themselves. You know, this is my Star Wars, and when you're making a film, a Star Wars movie that's going to be seen by millions of people, it can't be about your Star Wars. It has to be about our Star Wars. And it just seems like, I mean, with The Rise of Skywalker, I've said my piece with The Rise of Skywalker. Will I buy it on Blu-ray in Steelbox form? Because I've been collecting all the Disney era Star Wars in Steelbox. Yeah, I'll probably pick it up. You know, there's going to be a bunch of documentaries loaded on those discs, and so I'm going to devour all those documentaries because I love that stuff. And it's Star Wars. But, you know, what a mess. What a mess. Now, the novelization is trying to fix things. It's trying to justify certain things. And it's just too little too late. Like, you know, there's so much. Just like you could have cut out Canto Bight from The Last Jedi and focused more on Luke and the training and given Luke more to do, and maybe even give us a little bit more of who Snoke is, instead of showing us a casino planet and riding horses through the fields. In that same vein, there's a lot of stuff you could have cut out of The Rise of Skywalker that didn't need to be there. Like the whole Kerry Russell's character and Poe, like that whole thing, the whole thing about C-3PO having to erase his memory in order to get the Sith code the Sith language nonsense. Like, that didn't need to be there. It was such a MacGuffin chasing movie. I mean, it was Midnight Madness Star Wars, you know, where they had to go here, they had to go there, they had to find this, they had to find that. It was a scavenger hunt. The whole thing about them sinking in the sand and having to heal this snake, to then find the ship, to then go to find the speeder, to then go over here, to then go over there. I mean, give me a break. Focus on the things that are Star Wars. Don't focus on this nonsense. Oh my gosh. And you know what I hate? The thing that I hate most is that instead of talking about Star Wars and being so enthusiastic and happy about it, like, I get frustrated talking about it, the films, because the Clone Wars, I gotta say, I'm finishing up season 6. I'm gonna start watching season 7. You're gonna get my 2 cents on that coming up. But just from what I've seen, oh my gosh, Clone Wars is an amazing show. Star Wars Rebels, amazing. Even Star Wars Resistance, which I have not finished watching, as silly as it is, it's a great combination of silly stuff for kids, and it's really like there's a story in there. Like, you care about these characters. Like, you care about these characters. Like, I care more about Ezra and Kanan and Hera and Sabine and Zeb and Chopper than I do about Poe, Rey, BB-8, and whoever else was in that movie. But, you know, what are you going to do? Hopefully, the ship will start to go in the right direction. Sometimes, in order to move forward, you got to go back. And I think that's what Lucasfilm is doing. They're going to start creating content that takes place, I think, like 200 years before The Phantom Menace, and they're calling it the High Republic. So it's not the Old Republic, it's the High Republic. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, that in-between era before the golden age of Jedi battling Sith and the Old Republic. This is going to be like what was going on in Star Wars with Jedi right before, like, the galaxy became really political, because it seems like the Phantom Menace was like the breaking point of the galaxy going from the old ways of Jedi protecting and peacekeeping to politics getting involved. Like, I think that's what the prequels were all about. It's about how politics got involved and ruined the Force, ruined the Jedi, ruined the galaxy. So it'll be nice to see what happens with stories that take place when you go back to a more pure time, I think. And if they make movies out of that, that'll be amazing. I'm gonna be so pumped for that. So I'm gonna end it right here, guys. What do you think? You know, have you checked out some of those snippets from the novelization? What do you think about this whole Palpatine clone, and his son was a clone? So in essence, Rey's father was basically a clone of Palpatine. So Palpatine was kind of like Rey's father. And so Rey is like a Palpatine, birthed from a clone of Palpatine, who then becomes a Skywalker. And what? So let me know in the comments below. DM me over at Star Wars Car Talk on Instagram, or at Jedi Toy Masters on Instagram. I'm the Maurice Mercado on Instagram, and I am Maurice Mercado saying, woo, may the Force be with you.